A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one important thing.
Welcome to the Morning Hedgehog podcast, where we explore the business ideas that shape your success. Here are your hosts, Ira Gardner and Glennis Thomas.
Well, welcome to today's episode of the Morning Hedgehog. And today I want to talk about branding. It's such a critical part of our business. And I'm not going to share everything. I mean, I've got like pages and pages of research, but I want to hit some highlights of some key things that I've researched and come up with. And I want to show you how we can apply branding to developing a website strategy that works for us. So to begin with, what I want to share with you today is culmination of a lot of years of research about branding, and just going to answer some key questions. First of all, what is a brand? And you work in marketing quite a bit. So how would you define brand?
It's been a shifting definition for me. And more recently, I would say it's how people feel about you and what they say about you.
Right. And it really is, what gets me excited about branding is it operates on the subconscious level. And that's really been part of the greatest development of research on psychology of marketing and selling has been this discovery about how we can communicate non-verbally at the subconscious level to draw people to us that have an alignment of values and personality traits that are looking for what we have to offer. And I think if we do our branding correctly, we are able to draw customers to us that really are our ideal target audience for us to be able to create the strongest relationships, as we've talked a lot about. And the definition of branding is the marketing practice of creating a name, symbol, or design and customer experience that identifies and differentiates a product from other products. And just looking at these graphics here, thinking about the value of branding, that a regular cup of coffee made at home costs about 27 cents per cup. If you go to more of a premium coffee made at home with like a K-cup, you're going to spend about 67 cents per cup. But if you go to Starbucks, because they do such a great job with branding, creating the whole experience, you're going to pay $2.10 for a cup of drip coffee. That is an 8 times markup compared to what it would cost for you to make gourmet coffee at home. And again, thinking about the fact that I can make a steak. In fact, I rarely order a steak at a restaurant because I can cook steak pretty well at home. But I can buy a New York steak around $7 per pound on sale at the grocery store, but I'll spend at least $43 per pound for a Ruth Chris steak. And so I'm going to spend upwards of $200 for a dinner for two for something that is very inexpensive to purchase and cook at home. That's really all due to the experience of branding. And so when we think about the elements of a brand, it includes your mission as being expressed as an emotion. And really branding is that emotional piece. It's your logo or your word mark. It's your typeface. It's how you design your website, your product packaging, promotional materials, the customer experience. Again, I think of the Sarah Petty book, Worth Every Penny, where she's really focused on creating that experience that differentiates the products. Your branding also includes your employees. For example, are they wearing a branded logo clothing as kind of a uniform, or what are they're part of your customer experience. So you got to think about branding all the way from the owner down to the employee. And then ultimately you are your brand and you represent it best. And so this really is about how you carry yourself in the world.
And I just want to interject. I was just having a conversation with a photographer who wants to open up her and become a business. She's been doing it as a hobby, and I was talking to her about it yesterday. And one of the things I was explaining to her is because she's really struggling with price. She's really struggling with pricing herself appropriately. And I've been trying to explain to her that customer experience is such a huge part of your business. And even in the examples that you were giving here, logically people understand I could cook the steak at home, I could make the cup of coffee at home, but they're paying to be served. They're paying for the experience. They know this. And most of us as photographers, that's what we are trying to sell here, is that sure, you could take a photo with your cell phone, or maybe you have a nice consumer camera. You're paying for our experience, absolutely, but how you price yourself is also based on the experience of being served. I just think that's so important for those new photographers who are really struggling with how to price themselves.
Absolutely. That is the major differentiation factor when you're selling a service or a product that is a category of work or a genre. So if I'm doing wedding photography, if I'm doing headshots, if I'm doing tabletop product photography, in commercial photography, I think they were aware of this a lot earlier in some respects than retail photographers, because it's all about creating a relationship with their customers. And I remember I had a former student that went down to Los Angeles and became a high-level studio assistant for some of the top photographers out there. He ended up working with, David LaChapelle and Annie Leibovitz. And I remember when he first came back to visit, he brought up this sort of frustration over, he says, I'm doing all the setting up of the lights. I'm coming up with the initial rough end, and the photographer's not doing anything. And I said, well, what do you mean? I said, your job is to make it so they can create the relationship with the client. And in fact, that's exactly what's happening. And I had another former student that did a internship with a really successful commercial photographer and then stayed on for about 5 years as a full-time employee. And I'm like, wow, how did you manage that? Because this was a photographer that was notorious for firing interns and just was really considered difficult to work with. And I'll never forget, he just said, you know what? I know that his job was to interact with the client. And so whenever there was any hiccup or problem, I just got busy and fixed it. I didn't even take it to him. And he learned to trust me. And I knew that he was creating an experience with the art director and the client. And that's really a big part of that branding. And when you looked at his studio has a quality to it like the Ruth Chris Steakhouse. It's one of the most gorgeous places to walk into. And in fact, when it comes to branding, one of my favorite books about marketing and advertising is a book titled Marketing Without Advertising. And what it talks about is to walk into your space and imagine it from your customer's viewpoint. Is it clean? Is it professional? Is it organized? What are you communicating with your decoration, with your furniture? All the things that interior designers understand about communicating within a space, within an architectural space. And so I think what our goal is with this podcast episode is to help our listeners understand how they can find the right branding that fits who they are, custom tailored to them. Because when you have that, it's a natural expression of who you are, and you can start to differentiate yourself in your marketplace.
Absolutely.
So one of the interesting things about branding, I'm really fascinated with typefaces, and of course, a lot of our logos use word marks, and typefaces, just the line quality alone says something. If you look at comparing the typeface on a Wall Street Journal versus the typeface on the packaging for the iPhone 6, you'll notice the use of serif, very tall, narrow letters designed to give you a perspective of truth and authority, versus the iPhone as being, if you ever want a lesson in creativity, go watch the video of Steve Jobs announcing the iPhone and how it was going to be this revolutionary tool. Well, that's all about creativity, which is using this sans serif typeface with rounded, wide letters that just communicates non-verbally that this is the tool to be liberated and free to self-express. And that's all branding. And I'm going to skip all of this. I'll post some show notes about archetypes, but really we want to introduce the idea of archetypes in our branding because archetypes comes from Jungian psychology that examined cultures from all over the world and found that every culture had a common set of characters or symbols that exist within their culture that represent ideas, meaning, personalities, etc. And so he called these the archetypes, and he described it as the collective unconscious. In a way, archetypes are about defining what it means to be a human being on a universal level. And so, again, most research into psychology since World War II actually was conducted for the benefit of the advertising and public relations industry. Maslow's hierarchy of human need, that research was funded by advertising agencies. And I won't, again, I'll post an interesting link to a documentary. If you really want to understand about brand psychology, you want to take a look at a BBC documentary that explores the history of it, because it really came out of World War II and the examination of how did the Nazis get mass mobilization around certain ideas through public relations and marketing. So that's kind of where it can go on the negative side, but we're really focused on branding that helps our customers achieve their goals. And so archetype characteristics include having a core desire, a goal, a fear, and that fear is really the solution we're providing. If you're doing headshots, you're providing a solution to the fear that they're not going to make a good, strong first impression before their customer ever meets them. And so you're addressing that fear of, oh, do I look professional? Do I look like I know what I'm doing, expertise, so to speak. And the archetypes have a life strategy. They have a special gift that is their contribution, their greatest and highest contribution to the world. And they also have an emotional trap. So when we look at brand archetypes, while Jung had more archetypes than these particular 12, in the sort of life cycle segmentation of marketing, there are essentially 12 basic archetypes that can be organized and grouped by their shared core values, or they can be grouped by their shared emotions. And what's interesting about these 12 archetypes, and I'm going to give you a link to an archetype quiz that will help you find out what are the most dominant. What's interesting about the archetypes is they really, there are two theories, I shouldn't say theories, there's two hypotheses. My wife's a PhD anthropologist, so she always gets after me about the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. Yeah. There are two hypotheses about archetypes. One idea is that we embody all 12 of these archetypes in us as part of what it means to be a human being. And we draw upon different archetypes based upon different situations we find ourselves in. So if we're faced with adversity, we might need to be a hero. If we're faced with a fragile relationship, we might need to be the lover archetype. If we are in a situation where we need to be frugal, we might take on the regular guy or gal or the everyman archetype. And you'll see these, once I make you aware of them and you start watching advertising for the companies that you pay attention to, you'll go, oh, wait, I know what that archetype is. And you'll understand why you're being drawn to it. So the first idea is that we have all 12 of these in us at all times, and we just switch into an archetype that is needed at the time. The other hypothesis is a more holistic one that says that our life journey is to take us from the innocent archetype all the way down to the sage archetype, and that we start out life very fragile and innocent. We go through adversity and we go out and explore. We have to develop a sense of humor, so we get the jester. We pursue mates, and so we get into the lover, the caregiver, and ultimately we work our way to wisdom. And and it doesn't really matter which of these hypotheses is correct in terms of for your business purposes. What does matter is that your customers are coming to you from one or two of these archetypes. And so when we start building a brand, we're going to generally have a primary and a secondary archetype that we're going to be able to relate most strongly to our ideal customer.
Fantastic.
I'll pause for some questions. What questions do you have so far?
Well, I was just going over some other notes the other day, and I'm forgetting who the author was, but going over core human desires. So I see an overlap of this. And so I'd be interested to look at that a little bit closer in terms of how it does overlap and can that add to this. But
were you
I
looking
love
at the Core Values Index by any chance? Were you reading the book about the Core Values Index?
No, it
Okay.
wasn't that one.
Okay.
It's another marketing book, and it would take me too long to go and look it up right now. But the core human drives, in terms of from a marketing perspective, and anyways, I love this sort of stuff, and I think that even though it can be pretty academic, I think it just reveals so much. It reveals so much in terms of, and it really strengthens, and I think it gives you a lot of confidence because, you know, through the Core Values Index, you really understand who you are, and you start to see how much of your brand is already naturally because of that. And understanding that allows you to feel more confident in doing what you're already doing, putting yourself out there more, and making that message stronger. And I think that all this stuff will help people understand that.
Well, I think where I get really excited, and why really a big part of why that I want to do this podcast with you, is I want to help people understand that to become successful in their career, they just need to be the best them they can be. They need to find out who they are at the core level and clarify their branding to support them being the best, you know, you being the best you can be. And I think by studying brand psychology and studying the archetypes and studying your own core values and find out where everything gets in alignment, it's going to be interesting when we get to the point of actually building a website strategy. I'm going to show you that after we've done all the hard work of discovering what is our primary and secondary emotional drivers, if you will, it becomes very easy to develop the branding and the marketing with confidence, because there's a lot of research that has gone into it. What's interesting about this grouping, I really like grouping it into the groups of emotions. And, you know, the sense of belonging is so important for so many people. It's probably one of the most powerful drivers of what it means to be a human being, but also the ability to be independent, the ability to feel like you have mastery and control, and the feelings of being stable. And so it's nice to know that we can hit those touch points of what it means to be a human being through our branding. But here's the difference with a business. We have to be consistent. While we might have all 12 of these brands in our own toolbox of psychology of who we are, our customers, when they come to us, are coming to us from a specific psychological perspective. They're coming to us with a specific core value and an archetype that is drawing them to us. If we try to be all 12 of these archetypes in our branding, it's a recipe for disaster. In my opinion, you can only combine 2 of these archetypes to build a solid business brand.
Yes, and so a couple of things. I'm trying to look up right now what I was talking about before, because it just goes so closely with what you're talking about. But first of all, that belonging, I mean, everyone's really feeling that right now with our stay in place orders, right? I mean, what we're all really struggling with is that human connection that we're missing out on. So, and I think that when we start to see life go back to our new normal, this is a great opportunity for family photographers, and wedding photographers to really drive home that point, that marketing message of how photography builds upon belonging. And I'm finding, so in the book, The Personal MBA, there's a list of human core desires. And so similar to belonging, he stated it to bond, which is the desire to feel valued and loved by forming relationships with others, either platonic or romantic, that includes being attractive, well-liked, or highly regarded. So that need to bond, that need to feel like they belong is, I think, one, when it comes to family photographers and anything within that genre, is such an important part of your marketing message.
Absolutely. And for this episode, I'm going to have a lot of show notes for everybody. For example, there is a brand psychology pyramid of human desires that has come up with a master list of 27, I believe it's 27 emotional drivers that drive consumers to purchase. And it also breaks it down on a pyramid strategy of at what level are you willing to spend a higher amount of money. And so you can see what the core emotional drives are relative to a willingness to spend at a higher and higher level to acquire that object that's going to meet that emotional desire. It's an amazing, we operate in a time where psychological research is able to utilize functional MRI scanning to actually see the emotional response in somebody just by presenting stimulus and visual stimulus. Most of the time it's visual. 80% of what we think we know comes from sight. And that's where there's a database of about 700 images that are universally recognized to elicit a consistent result. There's this vocabulary of visual imagery that will stimulate specific emotional responses. It's a highly guarded database of images in that you have to be an academic researcher even to gain access, and you have to have your research vetted by a human studies board review process to even gain access to those images, because they're very powerful tools.
I assume babies and puppies are somewhere on that visual list there.
Oh, absolutely. They would be expressing that innocence and that awe, right? Absolutely.
Right.
And what's great is, so the archetypes are symbols, and there is a color palette, there is a line quality, there is a subject matter that relates to these 12 archetypes. And you can see in this graphic here where art history allows us to explore what those archetypes might look like. And so you can see the innocent in those ballet dancers, you can see the explorer with the landscape and the boat, and you can see how Da Vinci represents the sage with his what's the name of that piece, the Venusian, or
I don't know.
I'm terrible at remembering the names of pieces. But you also see a Jackson Pollock drip painting as representative of an outlaw, and you see Gustav Klimt painting of the lover with that beautiful gold
right.
glittery, it's just that amazing. So there's a line quality, there's a color, there's a texture that elicits an emotional response instantly. And that's the thing about branding, is I don't have to read a lot of words. The words need to be consistent, the copyright needs to be consistent, but I know visually, instantly, what your brand's about. So a lot of this research, there's a woman by the name of Kay Putnam who calls herself a brand psychologist, or no, actually she does psychology driven marketing, and she's a marketing consultant, works with businesses all over the world. Really an amazing success story, and that she was a spouse of a military personnel and traveling around the world, and she wanted to do something for her own career, and so she built a consulting business because that allowed her to travel. Well, now she's living in Italy and running workshops and consulting for some pretty big companies. And what she did is she basically put style boards together for each of the 12 brand archetypes, and she updates these periodically. And I'll have a link to her site, and she has probably the best brand archetype quiz out there for people to figure out what are the dominant archetypes in their lives. And where I've seen her progress in her archetype quiz is it used to just give you one dominant brand, and that was when she was first starting out. Now she gives you a ratio of your top 4 that really allows you to make some choices on your branding. And so you can just see, for example, these brands all represent the explorer archetype: North Face, Jeep, Starbucks. And you can see actors portraying these archetypes in movies. And so she's just done a tremendous amount of work for us in helping us develop our color palette and ideas for how to graphically represent our brand. Get past these. I'll post these in the video as kind of a slideshow just to go through them.
This is super. I'm going to be checking this out for sure.
Well, I want to skip down here. There's so much. Okay, so now we want to talk about logos, because oftentimes a consumer's first experience with the brand starts with a logo. And to think about how marketing and advertising has changed, it used to be the primary vehicle for advertising products and services was the Sears and Roebuck mail order catalog. And if you look at those old catalog advertisements, they started out with just a lot of text describing the features of the product, and it was very technical. Now let's fast forward to the 80s, and you started to see giant billboards with just a Nike swoosh logo and a tagline of "Just Do It." And we started getting this strong social influence of celebrity athletes that would be featured, starting with Michael Jordan, probably the one that stood out the most, right? And so we started moving away from product advertising being based upon features. Let's talk about the 700 thread count of Egyptian cotton in a t-shirt, right? No, they don't care about that. They care about what's the emotional vigor that's being portrayed by the person wearing the t-shirt. So we see that moving, and it moved more and more towards less words and more about graphic logos that really draw us to that brand. And what's really fascinating too, I'll just throw in here, I'm kind of a marketing research nerd. If you look at, for example, the Chrysler logo, one of the strong pieces of research about advertising goes back to a book from the 70s called Ways of Seeing by a man named John Berger, who pointed out that luxury brands often draw upon art history and mythology to establish a greater credibility with their audience. And so now if you go and look at today's Chrysler logo, you'll notice that it's emulating Pegasus wings. And the idea of a car, horsepower, flight, and the power of that is being expressed. Even the Nike swoosh is really based upon what Mercury's shoes, the flying shoes in mythology. And so we see brands diving back into deep history to be able to draw out certain key elements associated with these archetypes, whether it be the hero. I would think Nike is really all about finding your inner hero to persevere as an athlete. So to summarize this, you can look at brands and see common traits of line and text typefaces. And researchers have developed kind of this sort of charts for what kind of emotions are communicated with color, with shape, and with line quality. And so I love this quote here: design is where science and art break even. And an idea passes from the mind to the lips, continuing its journey through written language as typology. And that's a quote by David Dominco from 2008, and it was beautifully illustrated here. So when we start designing our logos and we're going to put our name on something, we need to know that our typefaces are not only informing us with the words, but they're informing us in terms of our branding. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I will just tell you, I mean, you can see that typeface and type design has a lot of different factors. There's a tremendous amount of vocabulary, but it all comes down to, I'll get you to this point here, and that is there are 5 basic groups of typefaces. There's business typefaces, there's modern, there's personal, there's luxurious, and there's playful. And those typefaces are inherently associated with certain archetypes. And so, for example, in this research that I did, and you can look at just these logos for Philips, eBay, Budweiser, Porsche, Mars, they all communicate something different. And what I've summarized, and what I will summarize on our show notes, is that different brand archetypes work best with certain groups of typefaces. So with the lever archetype, you see the personal script typeface working really well. And you see that as well with the caregiver can be a combination of personal script as well as a business-like script with those serif. The creator uses the sans serif, really rounded typeface there. Explorer is going to have more the bookish quality to it. And so I can, I'll post in the show notes a summary of these typefaces that really help communicate your brand.
So one of the things that's coming to my mind is that a lot of times we go and we hire someone to create our logo for us. And what I think that some people don't understand is that whenever you go and work with somebody creative, whether it's a photographer, whether it's somebody who's going to design your logo or whatever, it's only going to be as good as the direction you provide. Like, you can't expect that you're going to hire somebody and they're going to be able to read your mind and create something. So from an advertising point of view, when I worked at an agency, we always had a creative brief, which was several pages long, that explained what our brand was all about, who our main target audience was, what were some of the emotions we wanted to elicit. And then that graphic designer hopefully had enough information to come back with concepts, who have studied these things that we're talking about. They would have studied typography. They would have studied shapes and colors. But so what I want to interject here is that you can use this information to know enough so that if you want to hire someone, you can give them great direction, as opposed to listening to this presentation and go, okay, you know what, I'm just going to hire someone. I don't need to know this.
That is an outstanding point. And I think there are far too many messages out there, this idea of, oh, well, you need a great logo. Guess what? You can use our automatic logo creator feature because we're selling printing, for example. Business card sites, a lot of them will have a logo creator feature. Or, oh, you can use stock art and create a logo. Or you can go to Fiverr and just pay $5 and have somebody create a logo. But really, what we're talking about is building a brand that is going to have sustainability and lasting value. And what you're pointing out is, while you may start out developing your own logo to begin with, as soon as you can, hire a graphic designer. It will elevate that work to another level, but only if you are communicating the information that they need to understand what is the emotional key driving points of your brand. And so, excellent a point that you bring up. I actually was chair of our applied visual arts department at the college I teach at, and worked with the graphic design department extensively for an 8-year period of time. In fact, I still hang out with them as much as I can. And those creative briefs are really about trying to figure out who that company's, that voice and personality, and how to express that through the tools of design.
Yeah, and this, I mean, I'm just gonna, I know we're not talking about search engine optimization, but it's the same concept I try to tell my students, is that whether you're gonna develop your own logo or you're gonna hire someone, understand these key concepts. The same thing with search engine optimization. I get a lot of students who just go, you know what, I don't wanna have to learn any of this, so I'm just gonna hire someone. But understanding this helps you to be in a better position to hire the right person. If you know the if you know enough that you can ask those better questions, you'll get a feel if this person really understands it, and you'll be able to better evaluate the information they send back. For under search engine optimization, you hire someone, you should be getting reports back. You should be able to understand those reports, and you should be able to say, you know what, this report's lacking this key information and this key information, you know. And so because there's a lot of people out there who aren't great at search engine optimization, but they say that they are, and they can easily take your money. So just understand the basics of this so that you're in a better position to give somebody else the direction they need, or you're in a better position to do it yourself. As business owners, it is our responsibility that no matter whether we do it in-house or whether we outsource it, we need to know enough about it in order to be able to direct it.
Absolutely. And that's a recurring theme in our conversations. All right. So where do we go from here? How do we start defining our brand? And to begin with, I would encourage you to take the core values index and find out really what is going on for you. What are the driving forces in your life? And then relate that to building your company's mission. And then start thinking about, related to that mission, what are the benefits and features of your products and services? And what do your customers and prospective customers already think about your company? And what do you want them to think? What do you want to be associated with in your company? And so once you've defined your brand messaging, if you will, we want to develop a great logo and put it on everything, because that is the shortcut memory reminder. And then we want to start developing copy around our brand messaging, our taglines, our elevator pitch. And then we want to integrate our brand into every aspect of our business. We actually would start developing scripts for how we answer the phone. We would start thinking about our wardrobe and just communicating it. And again, I know, I didn't understand what I was learning when I spent a lot of time with Bruce Hudson years ago. He absolutely embodies this right down to exactly what he wears on a particular day in a particular meeting. He has such a great understanding of branding that way. And so you want to develop your tagline, and then you want to start developing templates that you can use, such as in Lightroom, developing contact sheet templates that would allow you to if you're presenting printed proofs, would have your logo, or develop print templates that if I'm going to post imagery to Instagram, that it's branded before it goes to Instagram, especially now that we know that Instagram, their user agreement, actually you're transferring your copyright of your image to Instagram that can be given away. So in my case, if I'm going to post to Instagram, I want my logo on it, and I want to treat it as a marketing effort, advertising, so to speak. And then stay consistent. You want to refine, and clarify your brand over and over and over. And I think that's where we get into Don Miller and the story brand idea of just clarifying the message so that you're on point and consistent. And you're a lighthouse in a sea storm of mixed messaging and mass media and social media. You want to be that lighthouse that is consistently there, drawing people that need your services to you.
Yeah, and so it's that because we're all being bombarded with stuff, we're not going to notice if you have one look here and a different look here. We just see that as two different companies, and it's confusing. So that consistency, just consistent, starts to build that know, like, and trust, because we start to see it multiple times. We start to understand what that means. And I want to go back a little bit, if I may. I know we're not getting into the nitty-gritties about logos, but you talked about you want to start using that logo everywhere. And what I see some of my students do is that there's this feeling that that logo has to embody everything about your business. And so they cram that logo with too much stuff in it, and it becomes way too detailed. And so just a reminder, that logo cannot embody everything. It's think of your business as a person, and that person has multiple different aspects of their personality. There's so much to each of us. We could never put one symbol that's going to embody us. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to try to make a logo that embodies everything about your business. Your logo is just a symbol that's supposed to then start reminding people about everything about your business, but it can't embody everything. And when you start,
that's what landing pages are for, right?
Landing, and when you have more real estate, like in a brochure, on your website, where you can, and in your individual interactions with people, those are all the different components of what your brand is all going to be about. And your logo is just the symbol that reminds. It's like the picture of your face. This reminds people of when they see my face, people that know me, and the more they get to know me, that just reminds them of what am I all about, which is a lot of different things. But going back to putting your logo everywhere, you're going to have to use your logo. Sometimes you're going to embroider it on a shirt or a hat. Sometimes it's going to be a teeny tiny little logo on a little itty bitty banner ad on the internet. So your logo has to be really clean and simple. If you have a big tree on it and lots of scripty typefaced, that's a lot of words, it's just not going to be able to be used in all those different situations. So I encourage people to keep that symbol, the logo, as simplistic as possible, but you can still do it. I mean, the Nike swoosh, I mean, how simple is that?
Mm-hmm.
You don't even need the word Nike in front of that anymore. People just know what that is. That's because they have shown it so many times that we now know that swoosh means a lot of different things. And you don't necessarily have to get that simplistic, but do simplify, because you're going to run a lot of troubles and a lot of headaches down the road when you realize it's not going to be, and you're going to have to give it to other organizations. Like maybe you're going to be sponsoring an event and you got to give it to somebody else to use, and they're not always going to use it as properly as you would like. So the more simplistic it is, the better it's going to show up on that flyer or show up on that website or show up on that little itty bitty little ad.
Well, it was interesting. Just last night, I was at a board meeting for a industry filmmaker group here in Spokane. And we had a presentation by a designer. It was a second round. We've been rebranding our organization, and we needed a new logo design. And this is the second round that we went through of looking at ideas. I mean, this is, developing a logo is a time-consuming process. You need to give it time to kind of develop a vision for it. And what was interesting is the second time around, we had 4 logos we were considering that had multiple variations of each logo. And what was fascinating is when we thought about all the places and ways that a logo needed to be used, it's going to need to be used in a horizontal format on a website. It might need to be in a vertical format on a blog post. It might need to be on a t-shirt, and is it going to look good in color as well as in monochrome? And when it came right down to it, when we made our final choice, we ended up going with something that had greater simplicity, greater clarity, and greater flexibility to it, because you can't be all things. There was a lot of really neat designs, but the one that fit the best was one that was simple, had the right color palette, could be in black and white if needed, and it needed to be able to be on coffee mugs. It needed to be, all the different places that you find logos for branding.
Yeah, and that's a great point I forgot to bring up, because one of my biggest headaches with my logo is that it's horizontal. And there are times where it needs to be vertical. And so what ends up, in order for it to fit that little vertical space, even though it's horizontal, it's got to get really tiny. And then it looks just really odd. It's unbalanced. I mean, really the safest way to go is a circle or a square, because it's going to work in most instances. And so our little hedgehog, that can be put into a circle or a square. It's going to be much more versatile, and you will not have as many headaches.
Well, and the interesting thing about the hedgehog logo is that and you'll notice certain logos you'll find will have 2 variations. One will be just a typeface only, and one will be a graphic only. And so with our hedgehog, that hedgehog graphic would be identifiable by itself, and you could actually reduce the text down to just TMH, the Morning Hedgehog, right? It's got a lot of flexibility, and I see that in brands like Johnny Walker Scotch, for example, is a brand that has lots of different subtle iterations of that logo. But we digress. I want to leave us today with some concrete steps that you can take today to start building your brand. And really, your brand starts with your portfolio. It starts by looking at examples of your work and analyzing your primary portfolio's aesthetic qualities, and start to pay attention to what archetype is that really expressing in your work. And again, going back to what you said earlier, Glynis, is it can't completely define you, but what we're looking for is what's the dominant theme in your work? What is the dominant aesthetic style in your work? And that's where going back and looking at a large body of work and start grouping it together. It's almost like playing cards and sorting the deck, so to speak, and finding out which stack is highest and what are those qualities about it, because that's going to represent really you at your best. And so we will see this in our segment on product development, and I will show you examples. In fact, I'll show you some in our next segment when we talk about developing our website strategy. And really, when I understand my archetype, when I understand the patterns and trends of what are dominant in my work, it makes it easier and easier to let go of the things that don't fit. So we want to pull up examples of your work, your primary portfolio, analyze it, and then research both historic and contemporary artists who have similar qualities in their work to your imagery. And then we want to analyze your brand archetype, including taking that brand archetype quiz that I'm going to recommend for you, and describe what your primary product and service is and how it relates to your target market and your ideal customer that is sharing this emotional connection with the archetype. And then you want to think about, what is your brand name? For example, are you using a name like Nike, which is kind of this abstract concept, not named after a person? Or are you the brand, and are you going to use a name like I'm using Photography by Ira? Well, that says what I do, and it uses the most memorable part of my name. So deciding on your brand name is important. And then go about and do logo research that's based upon your primary brand archetype. And also find logos that are brands that you're really drawn to. So in my case, I will tell you, I am drawn to Black Label Scotch. I'm drawn to Burberry, Ralph Lauren. I'm wearing Calvin Klein, Ralph Lauren. And so I know what my branding is based upon what have I accumulated in my life? What are the products and services that I've accumulated in my life? And what are those brands? Because I guarantee you the majority of your choices happened at the subconscious level. You just knew you had to buy that. You knew you wanted it. Well, analyze what those company logos are like and see if you can find some qualities to it. And then be thinking about the graphic part of the logo and the typeface part of the logo. And what is the color palette that communicates the emotion? Again, if we do a look at colors, color actually operates in a different part of our brain than our spatial understanding. Spatial relationships, where I am in the world, happens in monochrome. Color is a very emotive quality, and it's used for identifying, friend or foe, so to speak. And so we have a lot of research on color, and you want to start picking out those colors that mean the most to your brand. And then finally, put together a statement of intention about the kind of work you plan to develop into products and services so that you can now start to build the business model and build your web platform to support your company.
Excellent. Yeah, I really want to take this information and sort of then hold it up against what I have created. And I mean, I had some knowledge of brands and logos based on my education and my experience, but it's always fun to compare it against additional thinking and see where you can make changes. I mean, I originally created my logo. I created it myself with the intention I was going to do family photography. But then as I moved into business, it's always been in the back of my head of how, should I make some changes to that? And I just haven't gotten to that yet. I think it has a lot of similarities in terms of what I'm doing now, but I mean, there's always room for improvement. There's always ways how can we make that message stronger? So
I'm just going to jump on your website real quick and tell you what I see and relate this back to what you just shared, to what we've been talking about core value and brand archetypes. So if I go to your website, and I look at your logo here, your core value is that of a merchant innovator, and the merchant operates on a primary core value of love, supported by a catalyst of trust. And so we're not talking necessarily romantic love. We're talking about love as in nurturing the well-being in others. And so what's interesting is you've expressed that with a logo graphic that has this interconnected. In fact, looks like you've got a couple of hearts, vertical and horizontal, and an infinity loop. And so you're expressing that you are building connections based upon love and trust.
You know what's so funny is I didn't even realize that when I picked that. I didn't realize it was two hearts and the infinity sign. I was actually researching. I love Celtic knots, but I didn't want it to be too Celtic. So I wanted something that was a lot that hinted towards that. And it wasn't until after I made it and I had it for a few months that my daughter said, "Oh yeah, the two hearts and the infinity sign." And I was like, "What?"
And on top of that, you have chosen a typeface which is more similar to a newspaper, which is about trust and truth. And so you have on your own created a logo and a branding that is perfectly related to who you are at the core. You are focused on love, trust. What's interesting though is you said that you initially thought you'd be doing family, but you ended up not doing that. And what's interesting about that is because if I were to guess, and I don't know if you've done the archetype quiz yet, if I were to guess, your primary archetype would be lover, and a secondary might even be sage or creator. But it's not the girl next door, and it's not the caregiver. And so the fact that you ended up deviating away from family more towards headshot is more about independence, and it's more about empowerment rather than family is all about love and connected and caring for and nurturing. And so you have developed your path in alignment with who you are, and you've done a great job of expressing your brand. And then you chose this rather rounded, all cap sans serif font, which is expressing, like I said, I think your secondary would probably be creator. And this complexity in here is representing not only the two hearts and the infinity of the lover archetype, but it's also expressing a little bit of magician, a little bit of creator, a little bit of sage in there. And so the combination of your typeface and your graphic is really expressing who you are very effectively. The only thing I would consider changing would be to potentially simplify this by moving the word photography up on the same line and get everything contained within the Glynis Thomas main area.
Yeah, maybe I'll play with that. I saw the typeface as being something more luxury, but trust as well. I mean, when you say words like Burberry and Ralph Lauren, I think of that as being a trusted brand that's
it's about longevity.
It's longevity, classic.
Yes, exactly.
Classic. So I was thinking, and I think that's where that was coming from. Anyways.
Well,
yeah,
I think, I was just very drawn to how clear your branding is and how you've really focused on a niche in your business that is going to allow you to be the most well-known, most successful in that niche within your community. And that's really exciting.
Thank you for listening to the Morning Hedgehog podcast. For show notes or to submit a question or comment, please visit www.themorninghedgehog.com.